Conventions have long been at the heart of furry fandom. Furries from all corners of the fandom come together and bridge the gap left by the internet. Included are fans, artists, fursuiters, and performers. One of the most well-known performers from over the years is Matthew Davis, better known as the Ranting Gryphon. Throughout the last 3 decades, he has entertained thousands with both music and comedy. Today we look into the long history of arguably the most recognized comedian in furry history. Hello Furs from the web, my name is Scar, and this is the story of the Ranting Gryphon. Stay tuned. Matthew Davis was born in 1972, Arkansas. His family was Christian, and also musical. He was encouraged from very early on to pick up an instrument and learn the ropes about writing music. Some of his earliest Christmas gifts included early keyboards and old air-powered organs. The earliest songs he remembers writing were at 5 years old. Once into grade school, his creative juices began to flow, to the point where it overshadowed his academic life. For a while, all he cared about was just writing more music. Combining chords, rhythm, and melody was as satisfying as it got for him. When he was in 8th grade, he released his first ever album. Although it was only a few tracks with simple beats and synthetic voices, it gave him motivation to pursue a career. In his freshman year of high school, he dropped out and took day jobs to fund his musical endeavors. What would become Ranting Gryphon Studios was born somewhere in the year 1988. Through a mix of rudimentary used and salvaged equipment, RGS would dig its first life. In the earliest days, this amalgamation of equipment would be used to create music. As a teenager, he mostly focused on the genre of rock. Science fiction and fantasy served as early inspiration. Throughout the 1990s, he began attending different conventions. During his musical tenure, in the end of the 1990s, he crossed over into the Furry Music Foundation. The FMF was a European conglomerate of furry musicians and works, a large platform for the niche art form. Considering its role in the furry music community, he thought the site was an important idea. While he never had a major involvement with the group, he contributed to the site with the music he had already recorded. Some of these tracks lasted as far as the death of the FMF, with his name being the first listed among the ashes. He finished his GED and landed his first job at a video production studio at the age of 19 in 1991. Throughout this time, he would learn to play more instruments, specifically the guitar and bass. He would begin trying out for rock and metal bands, eventually landing himself in a Christian rock band known as Unlock. He was given the responsibility for writing original music. Prior, they had mostly performed covers, and he was probably seen as a way to break out of that loop. Within a year, though, the group disbanded. Throughout his 20s, Tu would tour with a variety of rock bands. He also taught guitar lessons up until the late 90s. This was until Matthew became fed up with the atmosphere of bands and left to work as a solo artist. In the 1990s, he worked as a police officer during his time in Wisconsin. Following in his father's footsteps, he wanted to help contribute to society and help other people. In his own words, he was rather ignorant about what motivates many police officers, feeling like he was naive among the crowd. Apparently seeing enough, quote, unfairness and crime taken place by other police officers, unquote, made him question if he wanted to stay in this career path, and shortly after, he left. Back in the music business, Tu would find work as a freelance soundtrack artist, contracted by video game developers including Sierra, Micropose, and Maxis. Music ultimately wouldn't be the thing that carried him into the future, though. That would be another beast entirely. In the late 1990s, Matthew began attending different furry cons. He was pulled into the fandom and created his persona the Ranting Gryphon. His studio name was changed from Take Two Studios to Ranting Gryphon Studios. These namesakes followed his transition away from music and into comedy. One day, while setting up equipment to record, he picked up the microphone and told a few jokes to his visiting friends. After nailing a few hard ones, the idea of stand-up comedy became a tangible goal. Following a few local performances, he uploaded a 5-minute recording onto his website. This political-inspired piece became successful and led to many more uploads. In the year 2000, the brand new convention Midwest Fur Fest reached out to have him perform during the con's first outing. Ultimately, his first live performance at a FurCon was a success, and paved the way for his long career. The 2000s brought forth the new age of Gryphon. The vast majority of his content became focused around comedy, and his rather dry style of humor. He regularly attended conventions, often performing stand-up for the attendees. Some of his performances were recorded and sold on DVDs through the furry retailer Rabbit Valley. RantingGryphon.com would host regular audio rants, offering more scripted work that expressed his opinions on a variety of topics. With the launch of YouTube, he also began producing video rants, with the first appearing in 2007. His presence online helped draw more people to his content, and also offered more material for his fans at conventions. Further programming included his 2 Cents show, the first incarnation of which ran for 87 weekly episodes from 2003 to 2005. This internet radio show was a collaborative effort between many co-hosts, and focused on furry news, world news, and reviewing letters sent by fans of the show. A second iteration, 2 Cents 2.0, and a third iteration, 2 Cents The Resurrection, followed in years after, shifting some of the elements around. He made a lot of content in the fandom, and is becoming a common name for many people. The Ranting Gryphon was on the rise, becoming one of furry's most famous performers. His dry, dark, and over-the-top humor brought a lot of attention, and he wasn't afraid to share his opinions. His rants ranged from the silly, to the serious, and even the controversial. His archive of work grew significantly, with many rants and shows either being uploaded to YouTube or his website. His growing popularity led him to being the guest of honor at many conventions, including Califor Zero, Oaklicon in 2004, Rocket City Fermi in 2005, Feral in 2006, RBW in 2007, and Mid-Fur X. 2 Gryphon was a founding member of the Furry Connection North, a Michigan convention that ran from 2008 to 2013, coming up with the idea along with the chairman, Gurr. In 2009, 2 Gryphon was even inducted into the Furry Hall of Fame by Mid-Fur. He performed internationally all over the world to both members of the fandom and those outside. Most famously, 2 Gryphon became a reoccurring panelist for Anthrocon. Anthrocon had been on the rise, sitting king as the biggest furry convention in the world. Gryphon's stand-up was always a headliner, and never failed to fill up some of the venue's largest rooms with attendees. 2 Gryphon also did a lot on his YouTube channel. After stopping most support for his website, it became his primary online platform. He produced rants in video form, continuing his famous series well into the 2010s. In 2013, he started a gaming series called Retromania, where he was playing older video games on camera, including Super Metroid, Kirby Superstar, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and many more. Later on, he branched out into more modern games such as Outlast, Soma, and Ori, among many, many others. In 2015, rants were being created much more frequently. He also continued the 2 Cents show, bringing on different members of the fandom to talk. As the furry political war began to take off in 2016, he also started a sub-series of the rants called Bird Box. Bird Box was a spin-off where he went unscripted on topics that weren't going to be in the public eye for as long. Since rant production took so long, it offered a way for him to talk about more topics that might not have stuck around as long. As a result, videos from him became even more frequent. The Bird Box also became slightly less about comedy and more about sharing opinions. His first Bird Box released in April 2016, talking about one of the most infamous groups in furry fandom, the Furry Raiders. Gryphon's first Bird Box covered one of the hottest topics in the political war, the Furry Raiders. This video was taken right after the RMFC incident. It goes into how what he's observed of the hate mob on Twitter has consisted little more than an armband and feeding on headliners. He points out the real issue of people joining a bandwagon and not always investigating the entire story as well. The growing political divide in the fandom left Gryphon in his style of comedy on the unpopular side. His statements about the Furry Raiders were fueling a raging fire. 2 Gryphon had a growing movement of people who simply were not fans of him. He was blasted on Twitter for his comments made about the Raiders, being called everything under the sun from a Nazi to homophobic to racist. The reasons for the accusation stemmed from statements he made in defense of the Furry Raiders, and some controversial statements he had made in recent years. As for the Raiders, he stated during his first investigation that he didn't research enough at the time to form a proper opinion about them, and that most of the people were deferring to the armband when it came to their accusations. When it comes to his rather politically incorrect statements, Gryphon was called out for a few in particular. The Dogpatch press article titled "Too Uncool" brought these into the larger public eye. Quote from Dogpatch: 2 on suicide, Jews, and slavery and child molesting. Whackity schmackity do. In his own words, with links for context. Quoting Gryphon, "If you feel so much pain that you need to end your life because some other douchebag is calling you bad names, then you deserve to be dead. No other species on the planet ends their own life because of minor harassment, and the fact that we do just means there's too damn many of us and nature is trying to find a way to get rid of us. If you're thrown into agony over little bullshit like this, then yes, you're better off killing yourself. Get off the planet and make room for others. People read this as encouraging people to kill themselves, although Gryphon has gone back and stated that that was not his intent. Quoting Gryphon, "I do not care that your people have been enslaved for the last 3,000 years. How often have you been a slave? If the answer is never, then you have no right to bitch, especially as someone who has never owned a slave in their life. The fact, if you care to research it, is that everyone, and I mean everyone, has at some point stemmed from people who have both been slaves and slave owners. There is no exception to this." And the final quote, "What is sexual molestation? The physical nature of it is obvious, but what does it represent emotionally to the victim? A loss of control, helplessness, perhaps some pain, being forced to do something they don't want to, shame and embarrassment. These are all unpleasant things, but they're also unpleasant things that most people experience nearly every day from their bosses or coworkers at their job, or from teachers and other students at school." These hot takes spread around the internet like wildfire. I'll leave the context below for those of you who also want to make your own decisions. In the Too Uncool article, Patchifer felt it would be a waste of time to diplomatically listen to Gryphon's side of the argument. Gryphon has argued the meaning of the first statement. Most people received it as him telling people that are too sensitive to online hate to commit suicide, where instead he was saying that people who already committed suicide because of those reasons deserve to be dead.
Where I say that people who commit suicide over mean tweets or mean text messages deserve to be dead. And then people turn this around and say, "Oh my God, Too is asking people to kill themselves." You know, almost like if I'd said people who go out drunk and get into a car accident deserve to be in a car accident. Oh my God, Too is telling people to go out and get in car accidents. They're twisting it around, making it sound like I told people to kill themselves, when what I said was, when people have already killed themselves because of text messages, then they deserve that. Two different things, but...
With this cancel culture group going after him, Too's infamousy was brewing hard. The following year in 2017, his panel requests for Anthrocon had been met with silence. Gryphon was removed from the programming without being given a direct reason. After 14 years of performing some of the most popular shows at the con, he was barred from performing ever again at the convention. He made a public statement on YouTube, informing his viewers of the situation. This stirred discussion online, and eventually the community pressured Anthrocon to give a response. Within a week, Anthrocon released an official statement as to why they removed him from the schedule. They cited a decrease in the attendance of his show over the last few years, and the need to open up the venue for more popular programming. They also say it wouldn't be an effective use of programming space. In his follow-up video, titled Dear Anthrocon, Too acknowledges the points they make, but points out a major flaw. His event in 2016 still brought in roughly 1,000 attendees, which was still more than most other shows. His show was big enough that it required use of the main stage to be able to hold the entire crowd. The excuse that they needed to make room for more popular shows falls apart when you realize the room had a cumulative 25 hours of empty floor time during Anthrocon 2016. Instead of moving him to a smaller room, they barred him from performing at all. According to Too, this extends beyond just his own shows, as he says he was also removed from the open mic and charity event as well. In fact, he says that he never even planned on doing his own show in the first place when he applied for programming, which means that the only events he was removed from were events that were still in the schedule after he was kicked out. Some of the users propagating him as a Nazi happened to be members of the board of directors. Specifically, a number of them were retweeting statements made against him. Too speculates this is part of the reason he was banned from performing. The board of directors voted for this to happen, and democracy played its course. Despite his support for Too the Ranting Gryphon, the chairman Uncle Kage was outvoted and publicly deferred to the board's decision. Kage has said in the past that the ability to ban someone is a power he removed from himself.
See, what people need to understand is I don't have the authority to ban anybody from Anthrocon. I wrote the bylaws of the organization, and I specifically took that authority away from myself because I know I'm a dickweed. I don't want that authority. I recommend the board of directors I don't think this person should be here anymore. It is up to the board to decide should that person come back.
And so despite however he felt about the decision, it was ultimately out of his hand. Gryphon did not attend Anthrocon that year in any capacity, and it also marked the year Anthrocon was no longer king. The drama for Gryphon wasn't over yet, though. His distaste with the board of directors left him in a side of the fandom that was sick of the politically charged left side of the community. Toward the end of July 2017, Tu also began a series on his channel called Finding Sobriety. He cataloged his journey to ending his alcoholism, and while he wouldn't end up quitting entirely, he began drinking much more responsibly and dramatically less overall. In 2018, Tu made a video promoting alt-furry as a group full of all sorts of people with different political views. The self-identified alt-furry is a rabbit hole and a half I haven't personally looked into yet, but many of the loud voices on Twitter and in the fandom didn't agree with that idea. After so much drama, Gryphon's status in the fandom was at an all-time low. Tu did continue making content, including a news segment called Reality Check. Overall, his content was still slowed down from what it was. Eventually, it became publicly known that it was partly due to his hip suffering from vascular necrosis. In short, his left hip was rotting from the inside out. Having issues just using it for the better part of 2 years, it was another hurdle that was keeping him tied down. After finally getting it diagnosed, he learned that there wasn't much that could be done about it until a replacement was deemed vital. What he did after was begin looking forward. Such did he title the vlog releasing later that June. At this point of his life, with his fight against alcoholism and the acceptance of his condition, it was time to pick up the pieces and look to the future. Furry fandom has been splitting apart over the last few years, mostly because of just how big it has gotten. The political war has only driven people further apart and spawned factions in a once united fandom. In April of 2020, Gryphon launched in a livestream talking about an idea. After seeing this coming and watching the fandom become as politicized as it is, a few furries wanted to break away. Branded Anthro fandom, the idea was to almost reboot the fandom and move away from the political landscape Furry had turned into. Anthro fandom was not long-lasting, with the extreme Twitter opposition ripping it apart just like they had alt-furry. The movement went quiet in the midst of the world pandemic. I've asked him about it, and Gryphon says he doesn't think it's possible to fix or reboot the fandom. From what he said, though, it sounds like there is still a group of people that are hoping to set up infrastructure and set up an event when the state of the world improves. A figure who once helped grow the fandom, trying to start again. In October, he released another video titled Shhhhhh. In the video, he films his character in VR chat, pretty much spilling his thoughts out to the audience. He talks about how he's tried some of the new ideas while trying to stay away from comedy because he felt like it just wasn't allowed in the current world landscape. In a very reflective manner, he compares to where he is now to where he began, with nothing. And so, he decides to start over. He alludes to a new show taking place in VR chat, likely using it as a canvas to tell his stories or do whatever he has planned. After another traditional rant, his new show released its first episode in January of 2021. Ranting Gryphon Show Number 1. Hello World released, a mishmash of ideas all produced in the world of VR. And that's it. With his programming, old and new, Gryphon has begun his return to entertain people across the fandom and the internet as a whole. Future shall tell where he goes, and with this new medium, who knows what will come out of his imagination. And that's the long history of Tu the Ranting Gryphon. Thank you to everyone who watched the video, and the man himself for answering some of my questions. Until next time when I talk about the history of furry insults in a rather silly manner, stay tuned.